At 24,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany, on that crisp October morning of 1943, Hauptmann Hermann Heinek's leather-gloved hands trembled slightly as they gripped the control stick of his Messerschmitt Bf-109G-6. Through his armored windscreen, he witnessed something that would haunt him for the rest of his days, a sight that defied not just comprehension, but hope itself. The sky before him was filled with American bombers, stretching from horizon to horizon in perfect combat box formations, their aluminum skins gleaming like a river of silver flowing inexorably toward the heart of the Reich. 291 Boeing B-17 flying fortresses of the 8th Air Force rode the autumn air currents between 23,000 and 27,000 feet, each bristling with 13 .50 caliber machine guns capable of throwing up a wall of lead that transformed the sky into a corridor of death. Hynek had faced large bomber formations before, but this was different. This wasn't merely about numbers. It was about the terrible mathematical reality that had begun to dawn on every Luftwaffe pilot in recent months. These 291 bombers represented perhaps one-third of the American heavy bomber force stationed in England. Just yesterday, his squadron had participated in shooting down 60 American bombers in the first Schweinfurt raid, the Luftwaffe's greatest single-day victory. Yet here they were again, the Americans returning with even more bombers, as if those losses meant nothing at all. Behind Hynek, 300 German fighters had gathered, every serviceable aircraft within 400 kilometers. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, Focke-Wulf 190s, twin-engine Bf-110s, even obsolete Junkers Ju-87 Stukas pressed into service as makeshift bomber destroyers. This represented nearly the entirety of Germany's fighter strength, and Hynek knew with crystalline clarity that there would be no second wave, no reserves waiting in the wings. The intelligence reports that circulated among Luftwaffe commanders painted a picture so starkly one-sided that it seemed like fiction. The Americans were producing 500 new heavy bombers every month. 500. In contrast, Germany's entire aircraft industry would manage only 15,409 aircraft of all types throughout 1942, fighters, bombers, transports, and trainers combined. The Boeing plant in Seattle alone was approaching a production rate that would reach 16 B-17s per day by mid-1944. These weren't just numbers on a page. They were the mathematical components of Germany's doom, calculated with the precision of an accountant's ledger. The transformation of aerial warfare had begun 18 months earlier, though few in the Luftwaffe leadership recognized its significance at the time. When the first American heavy bombers, B-17Es of the 97th Bombardment Group, arrived in England in January 1942, Reich Marshal Hermann Göring had laughed dismissively, declaring that American boys couldn't fight and their bombers were nothing more than furniture vans that would fall apart under combat stress. Major Johannes Steinhoff, who would later command fighter units and witness the full scope of American industrial might, understood that this dismissal represented the most catastrophic intelligence failure of the war. The Americans, he observed, built aircraft the way they built automobiles, with interchangeable parts, simplified systems, and in quantities that boggled the European mind. The first warning signs had appeared on August 17, 1942, when 18 B-17s bombed the ruined Sotteville marshalling yards in France. Hauptmann Rudolf Flanz, leading a specialized high-altitude squadron of pressurized Bf-109G-1 fighters, had participated in the interception. His after-action reports, discovered in Luftwaffe archives after the war, noted with professional concern that the American aircraft maintained formation despite severe damage. One B-17 had returned to its base with over 200 cannon holes punched through its airframe, yet it continued to fly, continued to fight, continued to threaten German pilots with its murderous defensive fire. Those 18 bombers, Flanz realized, represented less than 2 days' production from American factories. By October 14, 1943, the date that would become known as Black Thursday to the Americans, who lost 60 bombers and 650 aircrew, the Luftwaffe faced a paradox that would define the remainder of the air war. This was simultaneously their greatest victory and the moment when many German pilots realized the war was already lost. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, commanding JG-1, shot down 2 B-17s a day before being killed by defensive fire from a third. His wingman, Feldwebel Stefan Ligens, survived and later testified about Philip's final radio transmission. These are not the same Americans we faced 6 months ago. Their gunnery is deadly accurate. They maintain formation under any punishment. And Berlin tells us this is only the beginning. The Luftwaffe claimed 60 bombers destroyed that day, their highest single-day score of the war. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels announced it as proof of Fortress Europe's impregnable defenses. But the pilots who had pressed home their attacks through walls of defensive fire knew better. They had expended 90% of their ammunition, lost 38 fighters destroyed and 30 damaged, and suffered 28 pilots killed or wounded, nearly 25% of their attacking force. More terrifying than the casualties was what happened next. Within 48 hours, American reconnaissance aircraft photographed the Schweinfurt factories, methodically assessing damage. Within a week, 240 replacement B-17s had arrived in England from America. Within 2 weeks, the 8th Air Force mounted another major raid with 378 bombers, more than had participated in the entire Schweinfurt mission. Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Watts Galland, brother of the famous Adolf Galland and commander of 2/JG-26, captured the futility in his diary. "We are Sisyphus. Each bomber we destroy is replaced by 2. Each pilot we lose is replaced by boys with 20 hours in a fighter. The Americans lose aircrew and train thousands more. We lose pilots and scrape the bottom of the barrel." The winter of 1943-44 brought temporary respite as weather limited deep penetration raids, but it also brought devastating intelligence reports that circulated among senior Luftwaffe officers. These documents painted a picture of industrial capacity that dwarfed anything Germany had imagined possible. The Ford Willow Run plant in Michigan had achieved something German industrial experts had declared impossible: assembly line production of 4-engine heavy bombers. The facility covered 3.5 million square feet and employed 42,000 workers. At peak production in April 1944, it rolled out a completed B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This single plant would produce 6,972 complete aircraft plus knockdown kits for another 1,893, a total contribution of 8,865 bombers from one factory. Oberstleutnant Joseph Pips Priller, Gushwater Commodore of JG-26, obtained a captured American technical manual in December 1943. His report to Fighter Common stated with stark clarity, "The B-17G model now appearing has 13 machine guns, including a chin turret specifically designed to break up our frontal attacks. They have thought of everything. They have planned for everything. They can afford to plan for everything." Against this industrial juggernaut, Germany's entire monthly production of single-engine fighters in late 1943 averaged 1,600 aircraft, though actual deliveries fell short due to the systematic bombing of production facilities. The mathematics of annihilation were becoming inescapable. The Boeing plants in Seattle and Wichita were approaching 363 B-17s monthly at peak production. Douglas plants in Long Beach and Oklahoma City added 400 B-24s. Consolidated facilities in San Diego and Fort Worth contributed another 300. Martin in Baltimore was producing 200 B-26 medium bombers monthly. North American in Kansas City was building 400 B-25s. Republic on Long Island was manufacturing 400 P-47 fighters monthly. This was industrial warfare on a scale that reduced individual courage and skill to statistical insignificance. February 20th-25, 1944, brought Operation Argument, known to history as Big Week, which demonstrated American air power on a scale that shattered the last illusions of the Luftwaffe fighter force. On February 20th, Hauptmann Heinrich Prinz zu Wittgenstein, commanding JG-1, took off from Rhine Airfield to intercept what radar reported as a large formation approaching from the west. Climbing through 20,000 feet, he found himself facing 1,003 American heavy bombers escorted by 835 fighters stretching across 200 miles of sky. "I have seen the end of Germany," he wrote in his diary that night. The sky was dark with them. Our 12 fighters attacked a formation that stretched beyond sight. It was like 12 men attacking an army. We shot down perhaps 6 bombers. They barely noticed. The Americans launched 3,800 bomber sorties and 2,548 fighter sorties during Big Week. They lost 226 bombers and 28 fighters, losses that were replaced within 2 weeks. Luftwaffe lost 262 fighters and, catastrophically, nearly 100 pilots killed, 14% of the total fighter pilot force. These pilots could not be replaced. The training schools, starved of fuel and instructors, were producing pilots with less than 50 hours of total flight time. Oberstleutnant Hans Trautloft, inspector of day fighters, compiled a devastating report. The average American pilot arrives in combat with over 200 hours of flight time, including 75 hours in type. Our new pilots have 40 hours total, perhaps 10 in a fighter. They are not pilots. They are victims waiting to die. March 4, 1944, marked the psychological beginning of the end when American P-51 Mustang fighters appeared over Berlin for the first time, escorting bombers on the 1,100-mile round trip to the German capital. Major Georg Peter Eder, commanding 3/JG-11 and Germany's third highest scoring ace with 275 victories, encountered Mustangs during the March 6 follow-up raid. His combat report survives in the Bundesarchiv. The P-51 is faster than our Bf-109G at all altitudes. It turns better. It dives faster. It has unlimited ammunition compared to our 60 seconds of cannon fire. Most critically, it has the range to escort bombers anywhere in Germany. We have nothing to match it. The Mustang's Packard-built Merlin engine and Lamina flow wing gave it a range of 1,650 miles with drop tanks, enough to escort bombers to any target in Germany and fight for 30 minutes over the objective. German pilots, trained to wait until fighter escorts turned back at the old limit of their range, now found themselves facing fresh American fighters over Prague, Vienna, even Warsaw. Lieutenant Franz Stigler, a veteran of 487 combat missions, described the new reality in a letter to his brother. The Mustangs wait above us like hawks. When we climb to attack the bombers, they dive on us. Their speed in the dive exceeds 500 miles per hour. By the time we evade them, the bombers are gone. If we pursue bombers, the Mustangs destroy us from behind. It is systematic execution. By April 1944, the 8th Air Force could mount 1,000 bomber raids with 800 fighter escorts and did so repeatedly. The calculus of annihilation was simple and inexorable. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, commanding Germany's fighter forces, presented a report to Hitler on April 27, 1944, that laid out the stark reality. American bomber production exceeded 3,000 per month. American fighter production exceeded 4,000 per month. American pilot training graduated 30,000 pilots monthly. German fighter production struggled to reach 1,600 per month, with actual deliveries lowered due to bombing. German pilot training graduated 500 per month with inadequate preparation. German pilot losses exceeded 400 monthly. The enemy comes in waves, Galland told Hitler. For every bomber we destroy, they send 3. For every fighter we shoot down, they send 5. We are not fighting an air force. We are fighting an airborne industry. Hitler's response, according to Galland's memoirs, was to scream about betrayal and cowardice, ordering that any pilot who broke off an attack should be court-martialed. This order, requiring pilots to ram bombers if necessary, would lead to even higher losses among irreplaceable veteran pilots. The individual stories of Luftwaffe pilots from this period reveal the psychological toll of fighting an unwinnable battle against overwhelming odds. Hauptmann Robert Weiss, commanding 3/JG-54, had 121 victories when he was shot down and killed by P-51s on December 29, 1944. His final letter to his wife, written the night before his death, survives. Each day we have fewer aircraft and fewer pilots. The boys they send us from training can barely land their aircraft, much less fight. Yesterday, we had 6 aircraft serviceable to meet 800 bombers and 600 fighters. It is not war anymore. It is execution. Feldwebel Rudolf Müller, a maintenance chief with JG3, kept detailed records of serviceability rates that told the story of progressive collapse. January 1944, 67% of fighters serviceable. March 1944, 45% serviceable due to lack of spare parts. May 1944, 31% serviceable due to lack of fuel for test flights. July 1944, 18% serviceable due to lack of everything. We cannibalized 3 aircraft to keep 1 flying, he wrote. The Americans lose 50 aircraft in a raid and don't even notice. We lose 5 and the squadron is crippled for a week. The strategic bombing campaign's effect on German fuel production created a cascading failure that multiplied American numerical superiority exponentially. By May 1944, attacks on synthetic oil plants had reduced aviation fuel production from 180,000 tons to 20,000 tons monthly. Oberstleutnant Hermann Graf, Germany's 9th highest scoring ace, with 212 victories, commanded JG-11 during this period. His unit diary records the progressive paralysis. Training flights canceled to save fuel, combat missions limited to 30 to 45 minutes, aircraft grounded with full ammunition but no fuel, pilots prohibited from pursuing damaged bombers to conserve precious gasoline. The Americans come with full tanks, fight until their ammunition is exhausted, and fly home, Graf wrote. We take off with enough fuel for 1 pass at the bombers and a fighting withdrawal. If we engage the escorts, we don't have fuel to reach the bombers. If we attack the bombers, we don't have fuel to evade the escorts. We are defeated before we take off. The Americans, meanwhile, were consuming 20 million gallons of aviation fuel monthly in the European theater alone, more than Germany's total production for all purposes. June 6, 1944, D-Day, provided the most stunning demonstration of American air supremacy. Oberstleutnant Joseph Pips Priller, leading JG-26, was one of only 2 German fighter pilots to attack the invasion beaches. He and his wingman, Unteroffizier Heinz Vedarchik, made a single strafing run on Sword Beach before fleeing from dozens of Allied fighters. Where is the Luftwaffe? Hitler demanded. The answer was stark. The Luftwaffe had 319 serviceable fighters in France and Belgium to face 11,590 Allied aircraft. The Americans alone launched 8,722 sorties on D-Day. The Luftwaffe managed 319. The introduction of the Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter in summer 1944 briefly gave some Luftwaffe pilots hope. With a top speed of 540 miles per hour, it was 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied fighter. Major Walter Nowotny, commanding the world's first jet fighter unit, Commando Nowotny, initially believed the Me-262 could restore air superiority. After 2 months of operations, he wrote a sobering report to Galland. The jets are revolutionary, but too few too late. We have 30 operational Me-262s. The Americans send 1,500 bombers and 800 fighters today. If we had 1,000 Me-262s, we might make a difference. We will be lucky to have 100 by year's end. Nowotny was killed on November 8, 1944, shot down by P-51s while trying to land his damaged Me-262. His last radio transmission, "I'm burning, too many of them." By war's end, Germany had produced 1,430 Me-262s, but only about 300 ever saw combat. The Americans produced 15,000 P-51 Mustangs. The surviving Luftwaffe aces, who lived through this period, provided invaluable testimony about the psychological impact of facing American industrial might. General der Flieger Adolf Galland, in his post-war memoirs, The First and the Last, wrote, "By mid-1944, I knew the war was lost. It was no longer a question of tactics or courage or technology. It was simple arithmetic. They could lose 100 aircraft in a raid and replace them in 3 days. We lost 10 aircraft and never replaced them." Major Erich Hartmann, history's highest-scoring fighter ace with 352 victories, fought exclusively on the Eastern Front until 1945, but was transferred west in the war's final months. His first encounter with American bomber formations left him stunned. "I had shot down dozens of Soviet aircraft, but this was different. The Americans came in parade formation, geometrically perfect, hundreds of them. Their defensive fire was like a wall of tracers. They maintained formation while being attacked, while on fire, while dying. It was not heroism. It was industrial warfare. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, who flew 993 combat missions and scored 176 victories, later served as Chief of Staff of the post-war Luftwaffe and NATO's military committee. His reflection on facing American air power was particularly insightful. We were artisans fighting an industrial machine. Each of our pilots was carefully trained over years, each aircraft hand-built. The Americans mass-produced pilots and planes like automobiles. When we shot down a B-17, 10 more appeared. When they shot down a Bf-109, it was irreplaceable. By autumn 1944, the Luftwaffe was dying not from battle, but from systematic deprivation of fuel, pilots, parts, and hope. Major Heinz Barr, who ended the war with 220 victories, commanded JG-1 during the final year. His unit records revealed the progressive collapse. September 1944, we have 40 pilots and 12 serviceable aircraft. Yesterday, we received 10 replacement pilots. Not one has more than 50 hours of total flight time. 3 crashed on landing. 2 are dead. October 1944. Fuel allocation cut by 75%. We can fly 1 mission every 3 days. The Americans come daily. November 1944. We have been ordered to ram bombers if we run out of ammunition. This is not combat. It is suicide. January 1st, 1945. Brought Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's final major offensive operation, which demonstrated the futility of fighting American industrial supremacy. The Luftwaffe assembled every available fighter in the West, approximately 850 to 900 aircraft, for a surprise attack on Allied airfields. It was the largest German air operation in over a year. They destroyed 305 Allied aircraft, mostly on the ground. The Allied response was to continue operations without pause. Within a week, every destroyed aircraft had been replaced. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and, critically, 143 pilots killed or missing, including 3 Geschwader Commodores and 5 Gruppen commanders, losses that could never be replaced. February 1945 brought the final humiliation. The Luftwaffe could barely mount token resistance to 1,000 bomber raids that systematically destroyed German cities. On February 3, 1945, the Americans sent 1,437 B-17s and B-24s escorted by 948 fighters to bomb Berlin in daylight. The Luftwaffe managed to launch 28 fighters in defense of the capital. 23 were shot down. Lieutenant Walter Hagenau, flying one of the surviving fighters, described the experience. We climbed toward the bomber stream. It was like flying toward a cloud, except the cloud was made of aluminum and death. The escort fighters were layered above and around them, hundreds of Mustangs and Thunderbolts. We Matty one pass, fired our cannons, and dived away. I don't know if I hit anything. There were so many bombers it didn't matter. March 1945 revealed the full extent of American productive supremacy. Intelligence reports reaching Luftwaffe headquarters showed the United States had produced 96,318 aircraft in 1944 alone. 35,000 were 4-engine heavy bombers, and 38,873 were fighters. Monthly production was still increasing. Germany's total aircraft production for 1944 was 39,807 aircraft, of which only 25,285 were fighters. Most never flew due to lack of fuel, pilots, or parts. Major Wolfgang Falk, who had created the Luftwaffe's night fighter force, calculated that the Americans had dropped 1.46 million tons of bombs on Germany, the explosive equivalent of 33 Hiroshima bombs. The accuracy was steadily improving with new radar and navigation aids. By March 1945, American bombers could put 90% of their bombs within 1,000 feet of the target from 25,000 feet altitude. They had turned warfare into mathematics, Falk observed. So many tons of bombs equals so much destruction. So many fighters equals air superiority. So many trained pilots equals victory. We were not defeated. We were calculated out of existence. April 1945 saw the Luftwaffe exist only on paper. Of 1,500 fighters supposedly available, perhaps 50 could fly on any given day. Oberst Galland, with 150 victories, was appointed to command the fighter defense of the Reich in April 1945. He found no fuel for operations, no ammunition for aircraft, no pilots to fly them, no parts for repairs, no airfields not under constant attack. His first and last order as commander: save the aircraft for the museums. Save the pilots for their families. The war is over. After the war, captured Luftwaffe pilots provided extensive testimony about the psychological impact of facing American air power. General Lieutenant Joseph Schmid, last commander of Luftwaffe West, testified to the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey. From 1943 onward, we were not fighting to win. We were fighting to delay defeat. Every pilot who took off knew he was facing 10-to-1 odds or worse. They knew each mission might face 1,000 bombers. It was not combat. It was industrial slaughter. Major Georg Peter Eder, with 78 victories including 36 four-engine bombers, described the evolution of his thinking. In 1943, I believed we could stop them through superior tactics and courage. By early 1944, I knew we needed miracle weapons. By late 1944, I knew we needed an actual miracle. The Americans had turned air warfare into an assembly line. We were fighting Ford and Boeing and Douglas and Lockheed and Republic and North American and Consolidated. We never had a chance. The final statistics of the air war reveal the impossible odds the Luftwaffe faced. American production from 1942 to 1945, 300,317 aircraft total of all types for the entire war. 35,743 four-engine heavy bombers, 99,950 fighters, 2.3 million aircraft engines, 800,000 pilots trained. German production from 1942 to 1945, 119,871 aircraft total of all types. 1,194 four-engine bombers, He-177, 53,729 fighters of all types, 280,000 pilots trained with increasingly inadequate preparation. Combat losses told an even starker story. American, 18,369 aircraft lost in Europe, 6.1% of production. German, 57,000 aircraft lost, 48% of production. American aircrew casualties, 94,565, representing 11.8% of those trained. German aircrew casualties, 44,000, representing 157% of those trained, with many pilots shot down multiple times. By May 1945, the United States had 41,163 operational military aircraft. Germany had fewer than 100. The Luftwaffe pilots who survived underwent a profound psychological transformation. They had begun the war as the world's premier air force, victorious from Spain to Poland to France. They ended it hiding their aircraft under trees, hoping to preserve enough fuel for one more mission. Hauptmann Franz von Wehr, the only German POW to successfully escape from Allied captivity and return to Germany, though he was later killed in action, reported to Göring in 1941 about American industrial capacity after seeing it firsthand. His warnings were dismissed as defeatist. The Reich Marshal accused me of being corrupted by enemy propaganda, he wrote. He could not conceive of such industrial power. Oberstleutnant Hans Ulrich Rudel, the most decorated German serviceman of the war with 2,530 combat missions, primarily flew on the Eastern Front, but encountered American air power in 1945. His observation was stark. The Soviets had quantity. The Americans had quantity that worked perfectly. Every bomber was pristine. Every fighter was maintained immaculately. Their pilots were well-fed, well-rested, and well-trained. We were sending skeletal boys in patched aircraft with empty stomachs to face them. Major Heinz Nock, who flew 2,000 missions and scored 33 victories, kept detailed records of the changing odds throughout the war. 1943, we attacked bomber formations of 60 to 100 aircraft, dangerous but manageable with 20 to 30 fighters. Early 1944, formations of 200 to 300 bombers escorted by 100 fighters. We needed everything available to make an impression. late 1944, 500 to 750 bombers, 400 escort fighters. We watched them fly over, unable to reach them with our 12 serviceable aircraft. 1945, 1,000 plus bombers, 800 escorts. We no longer took off. We watched from the ground and waited for the end. His final entry, May 7, 1945. The Americans could have won with 1/10 off what they sent. They sent everything to make a point. The point was made. Perhaps no testimony better captures the Luftwaffe's recognition of defeat than the secret recording of General Oberst Hans-Jürgen Stumpf, chief of Luftwaffe Reich, speaking to fellow prisoners in May 1945, recorded by British intelligence. Gentlemen, we were not defeated by courage or skill. The Americans were brave, yes, but no braver than us. Their pilots were skilled, but no more skilled than our veterans. We were defeated by production capacity. They produced more in a month than we could in a year. They trained more pilots in a week than we could in 6 months. They dropped more bombs in one raid than we dropped on England in the entire war. This was not war as we understood it. This was industrial execution. They turned their entire nation into an aircraft factory. Every woman who had made washing machines now made aircraft parts. Every man who had built cars now built bombers. They approached war like they approached business, with spreadsheets, production quotas, and efficiency metrics. We fought with the passion of warriors. They fought with the precision of accountants. The accountants won. For many Luftwaffe pilots, there was a specific moment when they knew the war was lost. These moments, collected from memoirs, interviews, and private letters, reveal the psychological impact of facing overwhelming industrial might. Oberfeldwebel Heinrich Bartels of JG-27, April 1944. I watched them come, formation after formation, precise as clockwork. Behind them came another formation, and another, and another. I counted 7 combat boxes, each with 54 bombers. And this was one of 3 raids that day. I landed and told my commander, "The war is over. We just don't know it yet." Hauptmann Wilhelm Batz of JG-52, April 1944. We shot down 11 B-17s in one mission, our best day ever. The next morning, the Americans came with 50 more bombers than the previous day. Our victory hadn't even been noticed. Major Klaus Mietisch of JG-26, September 1944. A B-17 with 2 engines out, tail shot away, still flying, still shooting, still in formation. Its gunners killed 2 of our best pilots. This dying bomber was more dangerous than our best fighters. That's when I understood American power. Even their dying machines were lethal. Beyond mere numbers, American technological advancement continuously widened the gap. Each new model of American aircraft was superior to its predecessor, while German aircraft, starved of development resources, stagnated. The B-17G, introduced in late 1943, featured a Bendix chin turret with twin 50 caliber guns, improved Norden bombsight with autopilot coupling, electronic superchargers for consistent high-altitude performance, radar navigation aids, and chaff dispensers to confuse German radar. Meanwhile, German fighters were increasingly simplified to speed production, deletion of cockpit heating systems, replacement of electric systems with manual ones, use of substitute materials as aluminum became scarce, reduction in armor protection to save weight, elimination of radios in training aircraft. Oberleutnant Heinrich Erler, who would score 208 victories before his death, wrote, "Each month, American aircraft get better. Each month, ours get worse. They add guns. We remove armor. They improve engines. We dilute fuel. They enhance electronics. We eliminate radios. We are going backward while they accelerate forward." The pilot training comparison revealed the impossibility of German victory more starkly than any other statistic. American pilot training by 1944, 200-plus hours of total flight time before combat, 75-plus hours in operational type, 50 hours of gunnery training, 40 hours of formation flying, unlimited fuel for training, no combat pressure during training. German pilot training by 1944, 110 to 160 hours total, reduced from 450 in 1941. 15 to 20 hours in operational type, 5 hours of gunnery training, no formation training, severe fuel restrictions, training airfields under constant attack. Oberst Hans Trautloft, inspector of fighter pilots, reported in December 1944, "We are sending children to their deaths. They cannot fly, much less fight. They cannot hold formation. They cannot aim. They cannot even land safely. Of 10 new pilots sent to units, 8 are dead within 2 weeks." By late 1944, Luftwaffe morale had collapsed entirely. Suicide rates among pilots increased 400%. Desertion, previously unknown, became common. Some pilots deliberately damaged their aircraft to avoid flying. Secret SS reports from the period, discovered after the war, document the crisis. SS Oberfuhrer Wilhelm Bittrich, December 1944. Fighter pilots openly speak of the war being lost. They call combat missions suicide flights. Some pilots are shooting off their own ammunition over friendly territory and returning, claiming combat. Morale cannot be restored by propaganda or punishment. The men have seen the enemy's strength. March 18, 1945, brought the ultimate humiliation. 1,329 American heavy bombers and 733 fighters attacked Berlin in daylight. The Luftwaffe launched 37 fighters in defense of the Reich's capital. Me-262 jets managed to shoot down 8 bombers. The escorts shot down 25 German fighters, including 5 jets. Adolf Galland, flying in Me-262 with JV-44, the squadron of experts composed of Germany's highest-scoring aces, described the day. "We took off knowing it was futile. Each of us, Barkhorn, Hagen, Krapinski, Lutzow, had over 100 victories. Together, we had destroyed over 1,000 enemy aircraft, and we could do nothing. Nothing. We were insects attacking an avalanche." By April 1945, the Luftwaffe had effectively ceased to exist. American bombers flew over Germany in bright aluminum finish, no longer needing camouflage paint. They flew in straight lines to their targets, no longer needing evasive action. Fighter escorts were often canceled as unnecessary. 8th Air Force mission reports from April 1945 note: no enemy aircraft observed. No flak encountered. Target destroyed without opposition. Cruise control maintained. Mission resembled training flight. After Germany's surrender, the United States Strategic Bombing Survey interviewed hundreds of Luftwaffe personnel. Their testimonies, declassified in the 1960s, provide the final verdict on American industrial might. Generalfeldmarschall Erhard Milch, Inspector General of the Luftwaffe: "We knew from intelligence reports that America was producing 8,000 aircraft monthly by 1944. We couldn't believe it. It seemed impossible. Our best month ever was autumn 1944, when we approached 4,000 aircraft. But the intelligence was wrong. They were producing 9,000 monthly. How do you fight a nation that produces more aircraft in 2 months than you have produced in 2 years? General Oberst Hans-Jürgen Stumpf concluded, "The Americans proved that modern war is not won by warriors but by workers." Every bomber that appeared over Germany represented thousands of workers in factories, mines, and refineries. We were not fighting pilots. We were fighting Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Seattle. The final accounting of the air war reveals the impossible challenge the Luftwaffe faced. Bomber production: USA, 35,743 4-engine heavy bombers. Germany, 1,194 4-engine bombers. Ratio 29:1. Fighter production: USA, 99,950 fighters 1941 to 1945. Germany, 53,729 fighters 1941 to 1945. Ratio 1.91. Pilot training hours: USA, 200-plus hours average before combat. Germany, 110 to 160 hours by 1944. Fuel availability: USA, unlimited. Germany, 10% of requirement by 1945. Sortie rate peak: USA, 8,000-plus daily by 1945. Germany, 100 daily by 1945. Ratio 80:1. The psychological impact on German pilots extended far beyond the war. Many suffered from what would later be recognized as PTSD, specifically from the experience of fighting against impossible odds. Dr. Hans Joachim Lemke, a Luftwaffe medical officer who later became a psychiatrist, studied veteran fighter pilots in the 1950s and found a unique form of trauma. They suffered not from what they experienced, but from what they witnessed. They saw their nation's impotence against American industrial power. They watched their friends die fighting an enemy who barely noticed the losses. They experienced not defeat, but irrelevance. In 1962, a reunion of former Luftwaffe fighter pilots was held in Munich. Adolf Galland, the keynote speaker, reflected on the lessons of facing American air power. We learned that in modern war, the factory is more important than the airfield, the assembly line more decisive than the front line, the worker more valuable than the warrior. America taught us that industrial democracy could produce more than totalitarian efficiency. They buried us under the weight of their production, but we also learned something else. The Americans rebuilt our nation after defeating it. They protected us from Soviet expansion. They turned enemies into allies. This was their greatest victory. Not that they could produce 100,000 aircraft, but that they chose to use that power to rebuild rather than to punish. On April 26, 1985, the 40th anniversary of his capture, Johannes Steinhoff, former Luftwaffe ace and later NATO commander, spoke at the U.S. Air Force Academy. Young officers, let me tell you what it means to face American air power. It means to watch the horizon turn black with bombers. It means to count your ammunition in seconds while they count theirs in hours. It means to see your best pilots, men who had survived 5 years of combat, swept from the sky in minutes. But more than that, it means to witness the awesome power of democratic industrial might unleashed. Every B-17 that appeared over Germany was a testament to American workers, American resources, American determination. We counted our aircraft in dozens. You counted yours in thousands. We measured fuel in liters. You measured it in oceans. Steinhoff continued with profound insight. The lesson is not that America won because it was rich. The lesson is that America could mobilize its riches because it was free. Free workers outproduce slave labor. Free enterprise outmanufactured state control. Free citizens outfought zealous warriors. I flew 993 combat missions. I shot down 176 aircraft. I was shot down 12 times. But my most important mission was the one I flew in my mind. The long journey from Nazi zealot to democratic citizen, from enemy to ally, from defeat to understanding. To the young Americans here, your ancestors didn't just defeat us. They transformed us. They showed us that strength comes not from conquest, but from production, not from ideology, but from industry, not from hatred, but from humanity. The bombing was destructive. The rebuilding was transformative. We who once filled the skies as enemies now fill this room as friends. That is America's true victory. The story of the Luftwaffe's recognition of defeat is ultimately a story of industrial capacity, overwhelming, merciless, undeniable industrial capacity. When Hauptmann Hermann Heineck looked up at those 291 B-17s over Schweinfurt on October 14, 1943, he was seeing more than an enemy formation. He was seeing the mathematical certainty of German defeat. Each bomber represented 1.2 million rivets installed by American workers. Each engine represented 7,000 precisely machined parts. Each crew member represented 200-plus hours of training. Multiplied by 1,000 bomber raids, the equation became unsolvable. The Luftwaffe aces were among the finest fighter pilots in history. Many had over 100 victories. Some had over 200. Erich Hartmann had 352. But heroism could not overcome production figures. Skill could not defeat statistics. Courage could not conquer industrial output. In the end, every Luftwaffe pilot who looked up at the aluminum overcast of American bombers knew the same truth. They were not fighting an air force. They were fighting an entire nation mobilized for production. And that nation could lose 100 bombers in a day and launch 200 more the next morning. The war was over the moment American industry reached full production. The Luftwaffe pilots were simply the first to see it, written across the sky in formations of flying fortresses that stretched from horizon to horizon, an endless river of aluminum that flowed toward the heart of the Reich, carrying not just bombs but the mathematical proof of Germany's defeat. They saw hundreds of American bombers, and they knew the war was lost. Not because of what those bombers would destroy, but because of what they represented, the unlimited industrial capacity of a democracy aroused. In that recognition lay both defeat and ultimately redemption. For in seeing American power, they also witnessed American purpose, not conquest but liberation, not vengeance but reconstruction, not hatred but the hope that enemies could become allies. The industrial verdict had been delivered, the Luftwaffe had witnessed it. And in witnessing, they had learned a truth that would reshape the post-war world. Industrial democracy was the most powerful force on earth, and America was its arsenal. The men who had once filled German skies with the roar of Messerschmitt engines, who had painted victory marks on their aircraft fuselages, who had believed in the invincibility of German arms, came to understand a fundamental truth about modern warfare. War had been transformed from a contest of individual skill and national will into an equation of industrial mathematics. The Americans had not simply outfought them, they had outcalculated them. They had turned the entire continental United States into a vast aircraft factory, where every city contributed to the aerial armada that darkened European skies. This was the lesson that echoed through the decades that followed, that in the industrial age, victory belonged not to the most skilled warriors or the most fanatical believers, but to the society that could best mobilize its productive capacity. The Luftwaffe had learned this lesson written in contrails across German skies, taught by the inexorable arithmetic of American bombers that came not in dozens or hundreds, but in thousands, replacing every loss with multiple reinforcements until resistance became not just futile, but mathematically impossible. The aluminum river that flowed eastward from England to Germany carried more than high explosives and incendiary bombs. It carried the message of a new kind of warfare, where the factory worker was as crucial as the fighter pilot, where the assembly line was as important as the battle line, and where victory was determined not by the courage of individual warriors, but by the productive capacity of entire nations. The Luftwaffe had faced this new reality first, and had been overwhelmed by its inexorable logic. In their defeat, they had witnessed the birth of a new world order, one where industrial democracy would prove to be the most formidable military force ever assembled. The lesson was written across the skies of Europe in formations of American bombers, and the men who survived to tell the tale carried that knowledge into a future where former enemies would become the closest of allies, bound together by the shared understanding of what American industrial might could accomplish when turned toward reconstruction rather than destruction.